They say college is supposed to be one of the best times of your life, but my freshman year was an absolute nightmare. I was assigned to a room in Whitmore Hall, a towering, ancient building that seemed to creak with every gust of wind. My roommate, Lisa, and I hit it off immediately, and for the first few months, everything was normal. Until one night. It was around midnight when Lisa and I both woke up to a strange sound of faint tapping, as if someone was knocking on our window. We were on the 7th floor, so it couldn't possibly be anyone outside. We laughed it off, assuming it was a branch or something, and went back to sleep. But the tapping didn't stop. Over the next few nights, it grew louder, more insistent. Sometimes it would sound like scratching, like nails scraping against glass, and each time we'd look, expecting to see something, but there was nothing there. One night we decided to ignore it and go to sleep with our headphones in. Around 3 a.m., I woke up to the sound of Lisa screaming. She was sitting up in bed, staring at the window with wide, terrified eyes. "Did you see that?" she whispered, her voice shaking. "See what?" I asked, my heart pounding. She described a face pressed against the glass, staring into the room. It was pale, with hollow eyes and an unsettling grin. I looked out the window, but there was no one there. Lisa was trembling, clutching her blanket, and swore she'd seen it. I tried to calm her down, but I was just as terrified. We left the lights on for the rest of the night. Over the next few weeks, strange things started happening. We'd wake up to find objects moved around the room, books stacked in strange patterns, our clothes scattered on the floor. Sometimes I'd wake up to find Lisa standing by the window, staring out into the darkness, her face blank and unblinking. She'd never remember it in the morning. One night I woke up feeling cold. The window was open, and Lisa was nowhere to be seen. I got out of bed, my heart pounding, and looked around the room. She was gone. Frantically, I searched the halls, asking everyone if they'd seen her, but no one had. Just as I was about to give up, I found her standing on the rooftop, staring out over the edge. "Lisa," I screamed, running toward her. She turned to me, her eyes glazed over, and whispered, "He wants me to come with him." I grabbed her arm and pulled her away from the edge, dragging her back to our room. After that night, Lisa refused to talk about it, but we both knew something dark was lurking in that room. We eventually switched dorms, but I still have nightmares about that face at the window, staring in with that empty, sinister grin. Story 2, The Library Ghost. I worked part-time in the university library to make some extra cash. It was usually a quiet job, especially during night shifts. Most students would leave by midnight, and I'd have the place to myself, sorting books and keeping an eye on things. One night I was putting away some books when I heard a faint whisper. At first I thought it was just my imagination, but then I heard it again, a soft, breathy voice saying my name. I froze, my heart racing. There was no one else around, yet I could feel a presence close to me, like someone was standing just inches away. I tried to ignore it, telling myself it was just nerves, but as the night went on, the whispering got louder. I'd hear footsteps echoing through the empty aisles, pages rustling when no one was around. It felt like someone was watching me, lurking in the shadows just beyond my line of sight. Around 2 a.m., I decided to take a break and sit at the front desk. As I was flipping through my phone, I glanced up and saw a figure standing in the aisle, barely visible in the dim light. It was a woman, dressed in an old-fashioned white gown, her hair long and disheveled. She was staring directly at me, her eyes dark and hollow. I blinked, and she was gone. I tried to tell myself I was imagining things, but I knew I wasn't alone. I packed up my things, deciding to leave early, when I felt a cold hand touch my shoulder. I spun around, but there was no one there. My heart was racing, and I could barely breathe. I ran out of the library, not stopping until I was safe in my dorm room. The next morning, I asked my supervisor if anything strange had ever happened in the library. She told me about a student who had died there in the 1920s. Apparently, she'd been a dedicated scholar who spent all her time in the library, even staying after hours to study. They found her one morning, collapsed at her desk. Since then, people had reported strange occurrences, but the staff brushed it off as rumors. After that night, I quit my job at the library. But every once in a while, I still hear that whisper, calling my name, like she's still looking for someone to keep her company. Story 3: The Housemaid Who Wasn't There. During my junior year, I rented a small house off campus with 2 friends, Mark and Sarah. It was a bit run down, but it was cheap. And we figured we could handle a few creaky floors and peeling paint. But from the moment we moved in, strange things started happening. At first, it was little things, doors creaking open on their own, lights flickering, the sound of footsteps in the middle of the night. We joked about the house being haunted, laughing it off as we tried to settle in. One night, I was studying in my room when I heard someone whispering outside my door. I assumed it was Mark or Sarah, but when I opened the door, there was no one there. I shrugged it off, thinking I was just tired, and went back to my desk. But the whispering kept coming back, each time a little louder, a little closer. Sometimes I'd hear someone calling my name, and I'd find Mark and Sarah fast asleep, oblivious to the noise. It was unsettling, but I tried to ignore it. Then one night I woke up to find a figure standing at the foot of my bed. It was a young man, dressed in old-fashioned clothes with a sad, vacant expression on his face. He didn't move or speak, he just stared at me, his eyes dark and empty. I screamed, and he vanished. Mark and Sarah rushed in, asking what was wrong, but when I told them what I'd seen, they just looked at each other, uneasy but skeptical. Over the next few weeks, the presence grew stronger. We'd hear footsteps in the attic, whispering voices, doors slamming on their own. One night, we found muddy footprints leading from the front door to the living room, even though it hadn't rained in days. We were all terrified, but none of us wanted to leave, partly because we couldn't afford to break the lease and partly because we thought we could handle it. Then, things took a darker turn. Mark started acting strange. He'd disappear for hours at a time, coming back with no memory of where he'd been. He'd talk to himself, muttering in a low voice, as if he were speaking to someone we couldn't see. His eyes would glaze over, and he'd stare at nothing, like he was in a trance. One night I woke up to find Mark standing in the hallway, staring at the wall. His eyes were wide, his face pale. "He's here," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "He says he wants us to leave." That was the last straw. We packed our things and left that house, breaking the lease and finding a new place as fast as we could. Mark never fully recovered. He dropped out of school and moved back home, refusing to talk about what happened. I still have nightmares about that figure at the foot of my bed, the way he stared at me with those dark, empty eyes. I don't know who or what he was, but I know he was real. And sometimes when I'm alone, I can still feel him watching me, waiting, just beyond the edge of the darkness. Epilogue. Epilogue. It's been years since these things happened, but the memories are as vivid as ever. Some nights when I'm alone, I swear I can still hear the whispering, faint and distant, like an echo from the past. These are the stories I tell to friends. The ones I say are just stories, but the truth is, I know these things happened. They're part of me now, woven into my memories like a dark thread. Maybe you'll believe me, or maybe you'll just think they're tales to frighten you before bed. But remember, sometimes the scariest things aren't the things that jump out at you from the shadows. Sometimes it's what lingers in the quiet, what whispers in the silence, just waiting to be heard. And who knows, maybe one day you'll find yourself in an empty library, a dark dorm room, or an old, creaky house, and you'll hear it too, the sound of something that just